What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Evening Alpha. I'm your host, Todd Wanish, 26-year veteran of the comic and animation field and Web3 and pretty much everything else. You get to a certain point where you're just so old, you've just kind of done everything. I think that's really what it comes down to. You know, you just kind of grind and you just keep doing stuff. And next thing you know, you've kind of done everything. Not there yet, but I'm getting there. Anyway, this is Evening Alpha, where we sit down pretty much multi-times a week and we talk to some of the most creative, impressive founders inside of the Web3 space. If you're wondering what makes the show different than other shows, well, we are not necessarily an interview show or an AMA show. We're more of a coffee talk. This is a discussion between founders. Sometimes it gets pretty deep. It's always fun. So far we've had a blast with everybody we've met. And really it's a chance to really have an unfiltered conversation about Web3. What the real behind the scenes stuff, like what it really takes to actually make a project happen, to launch and to grow a startup in the space. So tonight I have a really special guest. I've been watching this project now for quite a while. It's got some incredible art. The concept is super cool. I cannot wait to introduce it to you. We are going to be talking to Bryce Anderson from Runner. What's up, Bryce? How you doing, brother?
Unmuted. Hey, dude, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.
Very excited to be on the show.
Absolutely, man. So first question we always ask, what is Runner? Tell us about
it. So Runner is, it's a multifaceted project. I think to start, I would say, we call it a Media 3 project. And what we mean by that is it's an NFT project, it's a Web3 project, it's very much Web3 native, but it has this kind of designs on a much larger scale, I think, than just a Web3 project. In my day job, in my normal life, I'm a film and TV producer. I work at a company called Clubhouse Pictures. My boss is best known for being the guy he took the Hunger Games off the shelf when he was 26 years old and said this should be a movie. So that really started his career. And then in 2015, he founded a company to put his name on the door. And that's when I joined him there at Clubhouse Pictures. We did like Bright with Will Smith. We did Birds of Prey for DC and Warner Brothers. We did I, Tonya with Margot as well. I did a movie called Kate with Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Woody Harrelson for Netflix. I did Project Power with Jamie Foxx. So, like big, large scale movies. And what Runner is an attempt to create a global level movie franchise from the, using Web3 as a crucible for creation and as really the first entry into the marketplace where you can go and you can find fans and build a brand as a community in a way in Web3 that is not possible in traditional media channels.
So this is really fascinating to me because I think a lot of us, the storytelling space in Web3 is actually pretty deep. Like surprisingly, there's a lot of us kind of floating around now in this space. This time last year there was nobody, and now I think there are founders and producers and just a lot of really intelligent people who have said essentially kind of the same thing. We're like, wait a minute, this actually opens the door for new storytelling avenues. So from your perspective, having worked in these big films and knowing the production side, like you bring up Hunger Games, like that's almost the second half, right? Because at least the book is written, at least the concept was fleshed out, right? How do you see bridging that gap then? Saying, because once it gets to the point where you have a script and you have the characters and there's an audience, the template is, I don't want to say set, but there's a path, right? Okay, here's a book, here's a comic, here's even a screenplay, whatever the base material is. There is already a system for pushing that through to getting that made into like a feature film or what have you. So what do you do for that first half where you're starting from nothing and you're like, we don't even have a concept or we don't even have established characters?
Well, it's really, really hard. And then the other thing is, there's plenty of ways to succeed in media, creating a book or a comic or something, or, a character, and yet still not be at the place you need to be to have a successful adaptation into a feature or a television show, right? Like the movies that get made into, or the books that get made into TV shows are a very specific set of books. Most books do not end up getting adapted.
Right.
And I think that's something that like people kind of forget about. So in my day job, what we do is we take nothingness. We start with a completely blank slate, and we, figure out what the movie idea is going to be. We bring in the right writers, we bring in the right directors, we attach the right talent that we can go and take that to a movie studio and say like, hi, will you pay us, $65 million to go make this project happen? Mm-hmm. And like, that's how we finance our projects. And so our entire, sorry, I think I just cut out for a second. Our entire job really is it's all about knowing which ones to pick, right? And knowing which stories to look for. And I think there's, a few hallmarks that we look for when we look for the legs of a project. And it's like, what is the depth of the storytelling? What is the meaning behind the storytelling? It's one thing, of course, to have all the basics of structure where you've got a hero's journey and you've got character growth and you've got an oppositional force and you've got, thematic resonance. And then it's another thing to look at it and say like, okay, but what is this about beyond what it's about? Like, not only is it structured as a good story, but is it structured in something that is going to connect with audiences in the world today? Is it relevant to what people are looking for in the marketplace? Is it achievable on the budgets that we can imagine? Is it achievable with the technology that we have, to make right now? And so those are all considerations. And there's a lot of different ways to make movies, right? Like, I think about this all the time. The original script for Bright, for instance, we were going to go out and make that movie for like $15 million, like run and gun, kind of like a cool indie movie. And then we brought David Ayer on. David Ayer is coming off of Fury. He had Suicide Squad in the can. It was not out yet. And by all means, everyone was like, wow, this guy's on his way to being, the next, call it the next Nolan. Yeah. And, suddenly it's a $40 million budget because he's got a slightly bigger appetite about what it is he wants to do and what he wants to blow up and where these characters are going to go inside this world. And then we bring in Will Smith, and suddenly it's an $80 million movie, right? Because when you've got Will Smith in there, now you're bringing in other co-stars. So it's like, and the script didn't change, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that was because when we looked at it and figured out like what kind of movie we wanted to make, but then what kind of movie Netflix wanted to make and what kind of movie that these elements support, suddenly you're making a movie in a different way. And so that's the other thing to think about when you're like approaching a project is, yes, you want to create something that is creatively viable, that is interesting on its own merit as the $15 million version. And then you say, okay, but if I produce this at the higher level, what does that look like? And if I produce this at an even higher level, what does that look like? Mm-hmm. And you've got to be able to adapt to deliver that version of the project if the opportunity presents itself. So that's like a lot of our job is to do that. And then sometimes you do it the other direction too, where you start out thinking you're going to make $100 million movie, and then you kind of get into it and you're like, well, we're going to blow up a planet, but it's actually more interesting when you just dive into the character story. And it's a little bit more interesting when it's just this sort of like personable kind of like romance. What happens if we cast young, slightly unknown actors, do it a little bit under the radar, limit the locations? Can we do this for $10 million and release it with A24? Like, that is the game of producers. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a skill set that is not always so obvious to the public when they think about movies and how movies get made.
Right. So that's really cool. That's a really interesting perspective. And yeah, I think one of the things that always interests me is the difference in perspectives between people that work behind the scenes and people that work or people that either watch movies or buy the comics, or the outside looking in is very different, right? And there was an old phrase that one of my first animation director mentors told me, which was, if you like magic, don't become a magician. Right? Because there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of animators also drink a lot, so things happen. Yeah. But there's so, and the point really of the quote is that there's so much work and so much that goes on behind the scenes to make the thing you love, that sometimes well, certainly, like when you're making a movie, by the time that movie sees the final cut and sees its first audience, you've seen it 1,000 times. You've seen every version, every edit, the uncut cut. Like you're looking at it for errors or things that you forgot, or performances, or what could have been better, or what could have been worse, or all of this stuff. Whereas the audience just sees it as an actual storyline that just naturally occurs, right? It's the animation is always the simulation of spontaneity, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing spontaneous about it, but when a character is going across a screen or live on film, it just looks like a story, right? It just occurs. It's magic, right?
Exactly. And you don't think about how, that character's shirt collar was debated for 3 weeks as we figured out what their neck looks like because of this one scene later on when this other thing happens. Like all those details that just seem like, oh, that's what this character looks like, because of course they do. You don't realize that there's 6 months of design that goes into that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, when I look at NFT projects, and you're right, where you say there's a number of NFT projects that are trying to jump this gap, right? It's like, how do we go from the NFT world to this kind of broad, global entertainment space? And it's really, really tough. And it's really tough to do if what you have is just an image or just a character design, right? It's like that character design needs purpose behind it. It needs a world that it comes from, and it needs a story, and it needs to be designed with intention so that as you take that character and put them through whatever trying situation you're going to put them through inside of your story, their affects make sense. Because if it doesn't make sense, it's just going to feel kind of garbled together or generic. And that's where and then you're going to fail in the broader global marketplace, because, you might make something that succeeds inside of the Web3 world, and that can be, obviously very lucrative and, exciting in its own right. And that's good. But I think, the way I think, and I think the way you think also, is like in the long term, Web3 has to figure out, how do we make media for the world?
Right.
How do we make media for everyone? And there's a lot of people that will engage with this, not because they love the technology behind it, but because they love the character, they love the story. It's like 5-year-olds don't love Star Wars because, they're obsessed with the way Lucas shot miniatures, right? Like 5-year-olds love Star Wars, right? Because lightsabers are cool. Full stop. That's it. And so you have to build something that can work on both levels.
Right. That's interesting. You have to it's really about baking something in that can work across all age groups, right? It's kind of like the success of The Simpsons, whereas, the kids, especially when it was launching, the kids were watching a different show than the parents were, because the parents were always watching the interaction of the family, and a lot of the jokes were so over the heads of kids. They were inside jokes for parents or adults. And then the kids were always attracted to Bart Simpson and Maggie and Lisa and all that kind of stuff. So they kind of went through the same process where there was something for each of those age groups as the human beings got older and older and older, right? They were able to go back and watch the same shows and actually see something different. And so, I definitely agree on the difficulty of creating this thing for this kind of universe for Web3. And I do think you're correct. And I certainly agree that especially in the storytelling space, the film space, the Web3 storytelling, whatever we end up calling this section of Web3, story web, copyright.
Well, this is why we call it Media 3.
That's right.
We're using Media 3 over at Runner.
I like Media 3 actually. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the ethos behind it is because it's not just film, it's like our project is actually, we're launching with a comic book, and it's a comic book out the gate that's run by our creatives, featuring 8 characters that we're calling our core characters for our story, and then that leads into the PFP drop, and the PFP is going to be a collection of characters that are all uniquely generated characters that exist within this world, and then hopefully when people get those characters, they go out and start creating other stories of their own. And those can be in comics, they can be in games, they can be in webtoons, they can be in, film and TV. It can be all over the map. And so it's not really film 3. And that's why we think of it as like Media 3. It's like, I would love to go do merchandising deals. I would love to go do, product tie-ins and animations and everything like that. Both for ourselves, just as like the what we might call the core group. And then also for the broader community. It's like, I want people to be able to participate in that way. So
yeah, that's awesome. So the way you're kind of seeing this branch out, and kind of the plan for this is that you launch the comic, and that kind of has that kind of provides a I
it's the way in.
call it like a fixed point in time. It's like, this is an event,
Yeah.
this happened, this is sort of an insight into the world, right? You're kind of
it's hand holding, right? You're either hand holding the audience into the world and like introducing them to the world through story, which is obviously the more interesting way to learn about a place. But it's also it's almost like community myth, right? Think about, like, let's get a little hoity-toity about storytelling and like what storytelling is, and it's the myths that we tell each other, right? And it's culture, and it's how you establish community. And so it's like, you have to have some story there to let that be the basis of your community. So then when people go off and start inventing their own kind of additions to the story, there's this kind of grounded, fixed point that everyone can reference.
Right. And so you kind of introduce people to the world so they kind of understand the environment in which to operate, right? And maybe even like a larger plot or a larger storyline to at least suggest where this thing can and will go. And then after that drops, you introduce the PFP drop, which is, so now everybody can own sort of their own unique character inside of this world, right?
Yes.
And so from that point on, is there what's after that? Is it purely like, okay, cool, I have this character, I own this character, I can do with what I want with it? Certainly, as you mentioned, that there's that aspect to it, right?
Yes.
Is there a plan? Like, is Runner like saying, okay, cool, now that you guys have all these 10K, whatever the collection is, I don't even know. I'm assuming it's like a 10K collection, right?
Yeah,
something like
exactly.
that. Right. So you do a 10K collection, and everybody kind of gets their pieces ready. What's the step after that? What's the interaction with Runner after people have their pieces?
So we're building ways for people to interact online, just with the pieces. First of all, everything. So I guess a little bit about Runner. So Runner is set on the planet Omega, and the planet Omega evolved, instead of evolving like ours did from a warrior culture where things are settled through war and conflict that way. Conflict on Omega is settled through racing and speed and competition.
Oh, cool.
And so, way back in the day, this was like, chieftains running across a field to settle a dispute. But as the society is advanced and technology has evolved, now it's this, high-tech racing in these incredible vehicles, like otherworldly sci-fi vehicles. And the main thrust of our story, as we tell it, is centered around something they call the Omega race, which happens once every 3 years, where every nation on the planet of Omega nominates a couple of people they call their proxy runners to race on behalf of their nation in this multi-day, multi-stage race that goes all the way around the globe. And the winner of the Omega race gets to nominate the sovereign of the planet. Oh, so nice. It becomes this big kind of, it's their political system, and it's also their, on a smaller scale, it's also how they settle local disputes and familial disputes and things like that as well. So there's different classes of race that you can be a part of. And at the highest level, the stakes of the race are really, really high. There's this one nation called the Avalonian Union that has been winning races for the last 100 years. And every time they win a race, they use it to consolidate their own power. So they have the best tech and the best racing program, and they're winning. And then there's several other nations, but on the other end of the spectrum, there's a nation called Quarren, and they're actually disbanding their racing program. They're going to give up entirely because they've been kind of subjugated as this, we call it third world country, for so long that they haven't even completed a race in decades. And they have this really young racer who's a really promising pilot who wants to put together a team on his own anyway, right? He's like, I'm going to race for my country, even though my country's not behind me. And he's going to do it using this technology that's been around for a while, that's really, really unstable. So nobody really uses it, but he's found a way to make it slightly more stable than it was. And it's this technology called pinch technology, which allows you to see and navigate through wormholes in space. And these wormholes can take you 10 feet, but they can also take you 10 miles, depending on how well you hit them. And in the context of the race, suddenly his slow beater vehicle might be able to put the screws to the Avalonian Union. And so that's a parallel that I really love. And when we talk about storytelling, I think that's really important, because it's obviously got like technology parallels and Bitcoin parallels to how we think about, powers and charge and what empowering technology can do to the small, kind of call it the everyman, right? And how that can upset political orders and how that can upset existing power structures, and the implications of that. And I think that's like a really interesting piece of the storytelling. So when we think about the Runner project from that storytelling context, yes, you're going to have a comic book. Yes, we are obviously we're film and television people. So our hope is to do that sometime down the line, and we have built it to succeed in that arena. But in the short term, you're holding an NFT. It's an NFT project. We're going to build in sort of a competitive system into our existence. I don't want to talk too much about that, but there's a pretty obvious translation to gaming because it's racing based.
Sure. Especially if you think of Web3, there are possibly other racing type games where if you don't know necessarily what Runner is, you could kind of imagine what it might be. So
yeah, exactly. And then obviously the vehicles and technology are a huge part of this culture, from all these different nations. And so, we're starting with characters because characters are essential to storytelling. Web3 is so much about identity and so much about avatars and everything like that it felt like the right place to start, to give everyone a character with a story, with a face, with a national identity, with a racing class, things like that are important. But I think long term, it's going to build and build and build on itself and hopefully become much more than simply a story project.
Interesting. Yeah, I see how you're kind of, because of the background of your team, I see how you from a high level, you've gone ahead and set the pieces for the success it can potentially have if it reaches a certain point. Like, okay, here are the, it's like baking a cake, right? It's like, okay, here's the recipe that we know works. Now we just have to, the only difference in this time is like, okay, instead of like buying the flour, you got to go, you got to go to farm it. You know what I mean? Like you have to actually go like grow the wheat yourself,
Yeah. And I think I talk about this all the time, which is like, what do I want Runner to be in 10 years from now? What does Runner look like? And I always talk about Pokemon, and I talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. When I talk about Star Wars, it's like, I want it to be a comic book and a television show and a trading card game and a collectible and a lunchbox. And, I want the gritty reboot in 20 years. And like,
right, yeah.
Like how do you exist as a property that, like, the beauty of those properties is there's something about the story that can be translated. It can be ripped out of its original medium and put into an entirely different medium, whether it's a game or a card game or merchandising, whatever it is, and it still feels like it is what it feels like itself. Right. Like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the toy, is just as essential to that property as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the television show,
right,
or the 1995 movie. It's all part of it. And I think approaching this from that holistic view in the design, in how we've built the story, in the storytelling, in the partnerships that we are setting up, I think like all of those things are essential. I always, in my head, Runner looks like a black hole at the center of a solar system, and the solar system spreading out around it is like that, one arm is movies and one arm is merchandising and one arm is gaming. But the thing that it is like a very kind of ephemeral, it's just story. Like at the center of it, it's just the IP and just the story.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like I have this conversation with so many people, and I'm always drawn to the power of storytelling. I have been since I was a kid. I mean, that's why I have the career that I had, right? But I think it's so interesting that if you think about storytelling is so powerful that it can do exactly what you just said. Like the reason why TMNT can launch something now and have a fan base and have people buy it and get people excited about the toy, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle toy line or new animated show or whatever, is because of the lineage it created from day one, the storytelling aspect of it, and on top of that, the universe building was so well done, even for a kids show, right? I mean, you have to remember, even before it was a kids show, it wasn't a kids comic. It was a brutal freaking comic. Like the comic itself from the 80s on was like brutal. Like there were deaths and blood, and it was not for kids. It was just an indie comic that was a play off of like the world of Daredevil, really. And so, but there were so many aspects of world building in there that you could do all of these spin-offs. You could do the dark and gritty version. You could do the kids show, right? And that goes to the strength of the storyteller, right? And to what you're talking about, there's no reason, and this is why I think storytellers have such an advantage in Web3 or as you put it, Media 3. And that's like, when you're able to craft a world, or the community is able to craft a world together, there's no reason why things can spawn out of that universe that tie it together. Meaning, there's no reason why maybe in issue 3 of the Runner comic or something, they're playing a card game. Like they're in the pit while the car's getting repaired, and they're playing a game, and the game is just weird and strange, but they know what they're doing because it's native to who they are. Right. And it's just a game that they play, and you just you have it in there a few times, and then over the course of time, if it becomes, maybe it becomes nothing, but maybe if it becomes something of interest to people, like what is that game? Well, here are the rules of the game. Oh, by the way, here's the card deck.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, by the way, here's the app that we're going to play together, where you can now actually play the card game that they play in the world. And so you can start to spin off all of these things and still have them kind of connect like threads to the core of what the universe can be. And I think I think a lot of NFT projects haven't caught on to this, and I don't know whether it's that they're not paying attention to storytelling, or if they just don't know, or if it's just because it's not in their background.
I think it's storytelling is hard, right? Storytelling is really, really tough, and I think it's deceptively hard, because it's actually, storytelling is easy, good storytelling is hard.
Right.
I think, you also, what I would, there are so many NFT projects, and obviously it's so early that like you got to give credit to everybody who's in it right now, because it's so hard. But I think, if I looked at like the current PFP boom, or the PFP boom of last summer, it was very much just like, here's the image, here's the single character wearing 1,200 different hats. And that works really well from a branding perspective, right? You can go and if you don't want to be an entertainment brand, that's a great way to go. Like if you want to go be like, Hello Kitty is an incredible brand, right? Incredibly successful brand. It's not a great storytelling brand, right? Even as much as we all know these characters and love these characters, it's a really tough movie adaptation, because it's like, what world, where do they live? What do they do all day? What is the conflict? Who is the bad guy? Like how does this all get set up? Right. And I think a lot of NFTs are playing inside of that sandbox. And they see movies and they want to go towards traditional entertainment. But I think, they're finding themselves in a place where they're holding a successful NFT project, and now they're retrofitting story into the thing that they've created, and they've worked themselves into a bit of a corner, because that is the hardest thing to do, to start with a single image and try to build a story around a single character, rather than build a story from the ground up and then design your character to make the best version of that story. It's a backwards process. It's really tough. And I wish those people the best of luck, but it is a really, really tough road, just as somebody who's been making adaptations into movies for 10 years. And something that we've done with Runners was like, okay, let's design this like we were going to go pitch it to Netflix, like we're going to go pitch it to Warner Brothers, right? Like it's a property that we could go sell, forget NFTs. We could go sell this in an entertainment deal as is, because it is fleshed out and it is ready. But we are starting, rather than going to a major media conglomerate and selling all of our rights and losing creative control and losing, distribution choices and, hoping that we can make one product and then 5 years from now, if it works, make a second product that maybe comes with a merchandising tie-in. Right. It's like, how do we turn around and go instead straight to the community, straight to Web3, bring those people into it, bring the creative energy into it, do what we've seen so many people do in Web3, which is create these incredible brands in an incredibly short amount of time.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, it turns out bootstrapping a brand with thousands of other holders all at one time, when everybody kind of economically benefits all at the same time, is an incredibly powerful tool. And also protect the creative of it and protect the vision of it and have the ability to go out into these, multiple channels all at the same time in a way that we wouldn't be able to at a normal studio, because they cannot wrap their head around the idea of, IP delegation. They cannot wrap their heads around the idea of launching a merchandising line before you launch a feature film.
Right.
Right. Like, what are you talking about? But of course it can work that way. We've seen it in Web3 already. We know it can work that way.
Yeah.
And I think that is sort of the dream and the reason that we go to this direction with.
So do you find that as a barrier? Is that like that idea, like you have this property that is essentially ready for prime time already, and you knew that, you know this from experience. This is not some bullshit pitch. This is because, it's a pitch, but it's a pitch based on past experience of success. So you're like, okay, we think this has a chance to hit the next step. And you also have a really strong case for saying, cool, we're actually bringing Web3 in to kind of support this. And the power of Web3, the power of pre-merchandising and getting the community baked in and kind of bought in from the beginning. But then to your point, you have sort of, for lack of a better term, legacy media or old school Hollywood, whatever you want to call it, who can't understand, like, why would you split this with your audience, or why would you let them into the creative process, or why would you sell merchandise before there's a film? That doesn't work. That's not the way you do it. Like, well, are you seeing like a barrier to that, or is
the only person it's bad for is the studio conglomerates, right? Because those are the people that are buying 100% of the copyright when you go and make that production in the traditional model. So they're the people who are benefiting from 30 years of, longevity that we're baking into this project. It's riskier to go Web3, right? Like, I could go sell this to Netflix. Like, we have a Netflix deal, right? I can go sell this to Netflix and they will pay us out, and then we'll go make a project and then they'll release it and that'll be nice. But if we go the Web3 route, right, what we can do, it's not even going to Web3 for financing. It's going to Web3 for that engagement and that kind of fandom clout. So we can turn around and make a deal with these traditional movie studios, right? They're still a great distribution platform for media. And you can go back to somebody like Netflix and say, hey, will you make a deal for the distribution of a film, right? Or the financing and distribution of just a film, but you don't get everything else. Right. Like, everything else is already its own thing. And so then you're in this place where you're making a partnership. It's a partnership rather than a sale.
Yeah.
And that is, I think that's better for creators, and it's better for the business as a whole, long-term. And I think, like, that for me is, if you think about the long-term vision, it's like, I'm not trying to topple Netflix here, right? Like, I'm not trying to topple these major companies. I think they have their uses, but they're in a place right now where they are the distribution channel and the financing channel and the production channel. And it's like, okay, how do we pull them out of this a little bit, and go back to a little bit more of what I would call a decentralized ethos?
Right. That's interesting, man. It's fascinating, because what you're really talking about in the startup world, you're really talking about leverage versus venture capital, right? Yeah. Because in the startup world, entrepreneurs and startup founders are trained to go finance a raise. They're trained to go land that seed round or that Series A or whatever you're going to go get the money. And the people that are training them is the industry, right? It's the investors that are training them to go get investment, right? There certainly are startups that require extreme amounts of money that you couldn't do on your own. Big data, science tech, right? Like banking and anything that has to do with pharmaceuticals. Like there's a tremendous number of things where you have no choice. If you're going to get this idea off the ground, you have to go raise cash. However, we entered a time really about 10 years ago where everybody, oh, you want an app for weight loss? Go raise $1 million. Well, wait, my friend and I could make that app, right? No. You need to go raise $500,000. You got to go get that seed round. Go. Put the gas on the fire. Rocket ship, man. So what people in the startups learn, and what I do a lot of mentoring and a lot of advising for startup founders as well. The one thing that we always talk about is having that leverage in your back pocket. If you're going to go raise, there's nothing wrong with raising capital. But there's a difference. There's a difference when you're trying to raise. If it's a bear market and you're dead broke and you have no way to make this thing unless you raise cash, they own you, right? Yeah. And everybody knows it. They're gonna run the table. If the idea is good and they feel like investing, they're just gonna take it, right? The equity take is going to be extreme, higher than if you had any leverage. If it's the exact opposite, if you, to your point, launch the property, build the audience, have the fan base, have people involved in it to where it's already ingrained, right? Where you've already done sort of the George Lucas thing. You know what I mean? You have the audience, and then you go, because then it becomes venture capital from your perspective. You may still need the financing, but at least in a negotiation, in the negotiation room table, like, you're coming at it from the perspective of, this is a bonus, right? You already have the leverage to say, well, I don't totally need you, or I can go somewhere else. It's totally cool. Right. I mean, right. There's, what's the old saying? If you want to raise cash, what was it? If, people who ask for money, God damn, I'm going to forget this quote. It's so good. I've said it a million times and I'm going to forget it. It's something that I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember the actual quote, but it's basically like, if you go asking for money, you get questions in return. What was it? Damn it. I'm going to butcher this. I'm going to skip it because I totally forgot the damn quote. It was so good. But basically to the effect of, if you go asking for money, you don't get anything. If you go not looking for money, you get cash. Right. It's about leverage and about perspective. Somebody in chat eventually will hook me up with that. It's a good quote. Trust me, it's a right quote. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Absolutely. I think that's exactly correct. And that's really the approach we're taking to this one too, right? Which is like, how do you use these traditional, use the entrance to a traditional media in the most supportive way for the community and for the project. Mm-hmm. And the best way to do that is to use them as little as possible, or to use them in the places where they're really needed, which is like, the moment you need Netflix is when you want 220 million households to have your product, right? They're an incredible distribution method. And especially when you consider that you can put that out into the world and then have, what happens to your NFT trading? What happens to that entire other vertical of the business the minute this is a product that is in 220 million households, right? And that becomes that is your upshot, right? And so for me, I think you want them as a distributor. You could use them even as a financier for a very limited piece of the project, but you do not want them to make this simply a single media property, because you also want to be able to go to a video game company and have the same conversation. And you want to be able to go to a merchandising company and have the same conversation. And you want to be able to go and I think setting ourselves up to do that long term was really the focus of how we built not only the creative, but also the business model, the NFT rollout model, is to kind of bring all of those elements in when they make sense.
So knowing that we're kind of in kind of a nice little, I call our storytelling corner of NFTs just like our nice little room. Like, there's several of us, but we're a lot of us, we all talk to each other for the most part. Everything is pretty cool. And, and whatever we are as a group, we are not like, the latest, armadillo NFT. You know what I mean? Like, we're not the next penguin NFT or whatever. Like, we're actually building that story. And you made an earlier point that I think is dead on, and that's when these other NFT projects come out and they hit it big, or maybe a lack of knowledge, or maybe just not giving a shit, to be honest. When we're going to make that Netflix show, we're going to pitch, we're going to have a comic book and a TV show and a video game. And I'm like, coming from the animated show, and I'm like, after doing that for 26 years, I'm like, yeah, no, you're not. Like, good luck.
Right.
Unless you have the background for it, right?
Right.
But so they hit it, they sell it, and they sell out, they mint out. They've got this influx of cash, especially last year during the bull run, right? Mm-hmm. And then to your point, they start bolting on story, right? They say, well, maybe they minted out all of their characters. Maybe they were modeling Bored Apes, so they said, okay, well, you own all the characters. Now they don't actually own any characters, or they have to use one of the characters that they have in their vault to kind of make that a main character. And then they try to bolt on the story to it. And I always feel like I can tell, right? Because it doesn't, like, to your point, it's not a smooth transition. It feels like you came up with a story after the fact, right? It doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel like you can tell. I don't know how else to explain it, but you really can tell.
It's retrofitted, and you can look at all kinds of properties where that's true too. Like in normal media, it's like, look at Mario movies, right? Mario, one of the best pieces of IP in the world, terrible movie property, right? Again, I talked about Hello Kitty. I talked about, like, the only one where it works is like Lego pulled it off.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, they were able to pull it off because they were actually able to associate their brand with other brands.
Right. But yes, that, but also just they are the absolute once in a blue moon success story when it comes to retrofitting story into a product that way. Yeah. And I think that's something that it's just a hard truth. Right. You can I hope every NFT project in the world goes and becomes, the successful version of that. But it's really, really tough. And I think we're going to see we are seeing a new version of stuff. I think your project is really awesome. Shout out to Adult Fantasy.
Thank you.
Shout out to the Fringe Drifters. I think it's really cool. You can look at Flinch is working on this. A similar sort of ethos in what happens if we go and create something where the story has been created
right
from the ground up to be successful in the long term, so that if we do hit that moment where you have that lightning strike, NFT success project, suddenly you're in a position where you can go and convert the play, not just for the NFT space, but for the broader media market, because that's what's going to that is, for me, that's the white whale I'm chasing, which is how do you create the thing that works on a global level that starts as an NFT project? Because, and it's a funny conversation, because in the NFT space, I feel like people are a little divided. Some people want to be well, but who cares about the broader world? Make them come to us, right? And the other side of things, people are like, oh, but you mean my NFT is going to be featured on a major streamer, right? And I think you have to look at it in both respects, where it's look, if we can go out and be successful in the world as a media property, as our own media property that people love just because they love our characters and they love our story and they love our art, that is necessarily always going to drive more traffic into the NFT, more value into the NFT. A lot of benefits for, call it, the original fandom. And it also will help the NFT space kind of in general. There is some sort of assimilation that will happen. And then I think who knows where the world is going, but onboarding into NFTs is so difficult right now that, in a few years when somebody figures out how to, streamline some of these custody issues and things like that, you will have massive, outside world fan bases.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think setting yourself up for success there is like starting with story and starting with something that's emotional.
Yeah, it's so interesting too. When we first, you talked about these two different camps. The camp that's kind of like Web3 is Web3 and Web3 only, and then this other camp that kind of like looks out, right? And it's very true. Like and I'm not gonna knock anybody. I'm not gonna bring anyone up. But when we first launched, or we were going through the launch process, because it took us a year to develop the technology that backs adult fantasy. And so during that year, we were building our Discord and we were reaching out. We were just getting ourselves known. And I was contacting all of these influencers. And by influencers, I mean legitimate influencers, right? Not like, hey, I have 20,000 people or 150,000, like people who were in the space who had been in it for like a long time, right? So it wasn't the follower count. It was like people in the space who had legit like push, at least from a knowledgeable standpoint. I was looking for mentors and compadres. I was looking for people that could help us put this together. And a lot of people were super friendly and super helpful. And of course, you have a lot of them that just never answer because it's the internet. But we certainly got a couple people. We got one in particular who just like blasted us, like privately was kind of professional, like, hey, I don't really, this isn't my thing, but I appreciate that, like very professional, and then publicly tore us apart for no fucking reason. And they were coming from this older, they were just more OG, right? They were like 2017, 2016, 2015, like had been around a while. And so their attitude towards what Web3 and blockchain was that it was fully encompassing in and of itself. Everything should be completely open. Basically, everything is open source. Like nothing should be like the fact that you have a trademark or the fact that you go after a patent or the fact that you would make a movie or something. Forget it. Like that was antithetical to the principles of what they believed it was. And it was I didn't mind it. I was like, whatever, man. Like, again, I come from a very different background. So I was like, if you don't think, I'm seeing his note at the same time. McDonald's is patenting 200 different things in the sandbox. You know what I mean? 200 different patents and trademarks for like drive-through McCafes for the future metaverse that they're gonna be.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't think people are actually gonna try to copyright and protect their stuff, good luck. But it does show kind of like this different mindset, right?
Well, and then that's very true. And I find myself somewhere in the middle of that. First of all, I'll say, I bought my first Bitcoin in 2013. So suck on that, NFT OGs.
There you go. What's up?
But also, that, especially that era, very, very much inside of that open source, everything on the internet, very libertarian kind of idealism. And of course, one of the keys to libertarian idealism is that anyone can do whatever the fuck they want, which
right.
they are doing. So it's hard to get mad when people try new things. But I also think, one of the things we're running up against is that there is no framework in American copyright law to hold this project, right? It does not exist. And the traditional media copyright system, which we're stuck inside of, you have to use it. Like, as much as I hate it, you do have to acknowledge it and use it to a certain extent within the Web3 world, not only to protect yourself, but also if you're going to go create something and then gift those rights to, or sell those rights to holders, you have to be able to protect their rights also.
That's right.
Right. Like that is part of your responsibility as a project founder, is to set yourself up and to set them up in such a way that they are in fact, receiving something.
Yep.
So that's something to keep in mind. And then at the same time, when you want to share those rights with those people, you are necessarily giving something of your own rights away. And that's where the current system doesn't have any sort, there's no, in the American copyright law, you own this or you own this. There's no, I own this, but I'm sharing this part of it.
Right.
Or I own this, but I'm allowing you to do, right? And then you get into these, like, you get into these commercial licenses and whatever else, and it gets really messy. And, you know, we spent a lot of time doing that. Obviously, working in the entertainment world, we have pretty thorough lawyers on this type of stuff, but it's a brand new problem. And we can look at what, you know, Bored Apes, you know, crossed a lot of ground in the way they structured their licensing deal. I think, you know, Tally Labs, Jenkins Valet, those guys have been awesome. They've done a lot of work, you know, really kind of pushing the space forward and how they work. And I think there's a lot to learn from those things, but it's something that, like, until there is actual guidance, you know, either you wait for actual guidance from government or you acknowledge the fact that this will be an entirely lawless space forever, right? Mm-hmm. It's like,
right.
It's one of those two things.
Right.
And so that part's been really interesting. And I think we're doing some stuff with on the legal side that's really innovative. And that's something actually I think people should talk about more, which is the innovation in NFTs, not just from a technological standpoint, but also from a social organizational standpoint and patent law and IP law, and how that will, you know, ideas of ownership and ideas of custody, and what does it mean, you know?
Well, let's talk about it then, because this is something that I'm very deep in. I'm very curious about, and this is, you know, one of the things that's been a challenge for us. Not necessarily a blockade, but just something we're very aware of. Is we move as fast as we possibly can, and I think every project in the NFT space, and this is for public, like everybody every project in the NFT space feels that they move slower than they wish they could. Right? They always the space moves so fast that it's just impossible to be as fast as you wish you could be. With that said, one of the places where we have been deliberately slow, or I shouldn't say slow, deliberately paced and researched, is on the legal side, because and it is a challenge, because there's so many teams out there. And again, I would never mention any names publicly, but you can see on any given Sunday, just looking at any NFT project that launches, when they're talking about gifting community this, or working with community for that, or sharing the rights for community in this way or that way, or licensing. And and oftentimes it's complete bullshit, where they just say it and the community starts to do something. But when you look under the cover, there's either no contract, or the contract doesn't cover it, or they're not approaching it from the proper way, or they're doing something, most oftentimes, a lot of times, doing something that you know from a cursory, just having an attorney and just cursory research is absolutely going to push them into the area of a security or the SEC or something that is going to destroy that company in X number of years. Now, maybe, you know, the founders will be rich by then and they'll take off and whatever, but
or they're all anonymous. Yeah, they're an anonymous garage brand project.
That's right. Somewhere. The project is not going to be around in 5 years, depending on whenever this law comes out that's going to smash them. And so what we've done behind the scenes is obviously we have a huge community component where we're looking to say, hey, look, as people work, you know, as we start to release more and more tools where the community can actually create on their behalf, to make sure that we have the legal documentation and the legal agreements in place that protect them and us and the business, so that everybody feels comfortable in an environment, right? This is a co-working environment and a co-creation environment. And to your point, it's not something that's really been done up until now, which is crazy to me. So I'm curious, like, and I'll probably pick your brain after all this is over too. But like, how are you handling it in terms of like certain types of like royalties or residuals or reward systems or anything that the community ends up getting? Like, what are you guys looking at from a legal standpoint? Is that something you can share?
Honestly, it scares me to talk about it specifically on a recording, because it's so dicey. Because the whole idea is like, okay, on the one hand, you want to reward community as much as possible, and on the other hand, like, I am not making a security, I am making a collectible, and so like, what does that look like?
Right.
I think, you know, things like revenue share or percentage splits, things like that are explicitly, you know, outlawed. Those can't happen.
Right.
I think, when we talk about what this project is, it's like you are buying yourself a collectible. That is it.
Right.
Now, we will also run things with these collectibles long term. So there will be things like, games that you can participate in, and there will be, online community events, and hopefully like in-person community events and merchandise sales and things like that this gives you access to. So there will be benefits long term. There will be storytelling benefits long term. If I have a premiere for this movie, hell yeah, that's your ticket. Like I would love that to be how this works long term. And thinking about what the benefits are for these people is like obviously essential. And then the other piece of it is that I would love people to go out and make their own projects. Like, I've been in the Bored Ape Yacht Club since basically day one, and watching how that community has responded to, you can look at the Jenkins Valet project, which is obviously one of the more prominent, but the Snoop Dogg Eminem things that are happening is so cool. The music label Timbaland, that's so cool. Even like people who have their own coffee brands and their own beer brands are using this logo on their business cards for their real estate company and things like that. Like it's a really interesting approach to community brand building. And I want that for Runner. Like I want people to be able to come in and take this in a direction that we haven't thought of, or take this in a direction that is very much their own, using the character that we've created and they've purchased. So my hope also is that the rights for that becomes more valuable as the entire community engages with it, because that doesn't become more valuable because I make something with it. It becomes more valuable when I make something, of course, but when other people engage and when the community engages as a whole. And like those things are important because people use them as their profile pictures, because people use them as merchandising, because I know a guy who created a company basically making ape merchandise, custom ape merchandise, like onesies and hoodies and all kinds of things. And that's his whole business, right? Is really like leaning into that. And for me, it's like that's a benefit of owning one of these. And I think more projects should focus on empowering their community to go make those type of choices, because that for me is really where the power of Web3 can get unlocked, which is in this idea of a community built project, or a community that can, like a fan community that can monetize itself in a way that is not possible in any other structure in society that we've invented so far. I've been really into obviously I'm in movies and TV. I've been deep in like online communities for a long time, but also like fandoms and fan fiction and what people create in those spaces. And one of the things that just has always struck me is the incredible quality of the work. Not, by the way, there's a lot of shit too. So some of it is really bad, of course, but the stuff that is good is really good, is just as good.
It's incredible.
Is just as, yes, exactly. And is just as good as anything you'll find in a bookstore. Right. And should be able to be published, and should be able to go out into the world, and should be on the New York Times bestseller list, and should be in all those places, and yet cannot be any of those things because of the way copyright law currently works.
That's right.
And so it's relegated to this kind of funny, dismissed corner of the internet, where you just have a bunch of people who are writing these things and sharing these things for fun and for free.
It's really incredible.
And then, you'll see people that'll write books that are hundreds of thousands of words long. And then other people will take those and they'll go do like voiced adaptations as to like audiobooks on podcasts with multiple voices, like different people reading different characters and music and scores and everything. And all of this stuff that people like put all this work into creating things that they really, really care about.
Yeah.
And then they can't do anything with it. So it's like, what's it look like if you create a property that has the ability to encompass that kind of fan interaction, and then also allows people to like exploit it and benefit from their own efforts. And so you can invite a character to come in, or invite a creator to come in and make something inside of your universe and keep it for themselves. And if it takes off, if it becomes, 50 Shades of Grey is a Twilight fan fiction.
That's right.
But like, what could have happened to Twilight if they had allowed her to keep it as a Twilight fan fiction and also own her own rights, right? Like, what does that do to Twilight, the brand, in the macro sense, if you allow that sort of crossover pollination to happen?
Yeah.
And I think that is a piece of how the internet works and how the internet can be so powerful that has not been unlocked by any of the traditional like media channels, and is something that is only happening in Web3, and that's the essential part for me of like what makes this so exciting.
That's right. I have a similar analogy where I talk about, as growing up, you're buying, Spider-Man comics or graphic novels or X-Men runs or anything like that. By purchasing this, I actually helped the franchise become what it is, right? Mm-hmm. Because I have the X-Men shirts or Spider-Man shirts, because I have the graphic novels, because I talked about it with my friends, because I was drawing the characters and putting them on the internet, because I was doing all of that, that actually helped to fuel me and honestly tens of thousands of other people, right? Like, because we were doing that, that fueled the franchise itself and allowed them to sell us more of the same thing, right? That's the reason there's a Spider-Man movie, is because people because Spider-Man hit something within the common cultural zeitgeist, and it caught and it never let go. That's also why Hate Monger never had a film and you've never heard of the character, right? Like, it's the same dynamics. And so my thinking was always, and even as a kid, I was like, well, why, if I buy this comic book that's Spider-Man, why can't that be converted into some kind of share, or some kind of reward when if the Spider-Man movie gets made and I buy a ticket, well, then I helped it become that multi-billion-dollar movie. Maybe it's just a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. I had this much to do with it. But there are some people, like the artists and the writers, who had way more to do with it, right? I still had my part. I still did my part. They did way more and either got the exact same thing that I did or less, right? Because they never got to celebrate. They're inventing characters and not getting anything, any kind of reward.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Spider-Man is also an interesting one, because I think the myth of Spider-Man, something that like the recent Spider-Man movies have proven, is that the myth of Spider-Man and the Spider-Man story is so powerful and so good that you can take it and you can throw the multiverse at it, and you can take it and you can do, I thought Into the Spider-Verse is so amazing. You get the Miles Morales story, right? You get the Peter Parker story, you get the Gwen Stacy story, you get the like Spider-Pig story, like all thrown in, right? All thrown into one movie. And you realize that like, what would happen, like, if you opened up, they basically, in some ways, they have opened up Spider-Man to fan fiction, right? Just within the Marvel umbrella, where they allow people to take it and go change anything about it, so long as they're slinging webs, right? Everything else is fair game,
right?
And it's still Spider-Man,
right?
And I think like that is so interesting, and it's one of the only things that's really working that way in the like pantheon of entertainment right now. And for me, it's like that. It's like it's on its way towards a Web3 ethos.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I absolutely could see that.
Batman, in some ways too. Like I saw the latest Batman movie, and it's almost like you're watching a caricature of a Batman movie. Or like Batman, like, because it's like the fifth one you've seen in the last 5 years, and you're just like, oh, it's another Batman and a different Batmobile in a different city. It's playing Gotham. It's like a whole new thing.
Yeah.
And Batman is no longer a character, but like a genre.
Right.
And so now you're just watching a person do a Batman, like a Batman the genre movie.
Right.
And there's actually something great about that and liberating about it, where it's like, oh, the next time I see Batman, I want to see a batshit Batman. Like I want to see something where they keep the dude, they call him Batman, and nothing else is the same.
Right. Well, they do that, to your point. They even do that with like the Joker movie that came out. It was so good and such a departure from the superhero genre, but still kept to the mythos, even though they changed things. That when I left the theater, I was like, that's the Batman movie I want to see. Like I want to see the Bruce Wayne version of that. Like I want to see that universe, the taxi driver, like platoon universe of the Bruce Wayne mythos. You know what I mean? Like, because that dude's nuts too. Like, I take the Arkham Asylum view on it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's such an interesting thing. I want to give a shout out to some of the people we got in chat. Willie D, what's up? Welcome. Regis, what's up, man? Welcome. Natasha, how are you? Let's go. Awesome. J-Ra, what's up? He says, what's up, Uncle Todd, Cousin Bryce, AFM. What's up? Jimmy T's popping in, says, hey, what's up, Jimmy T? Welcome. Yeah, man. So Bryce, there's so many people that I think are going to be coming up into the storytelling side of things. I think that as the year goes on, give it the next 3 years, I think so many NFT projects are going to come in and see what Runner is doing, see what Jenkins is doing, see what Adult Fantasy is doing. Like, they're going to look at the storytelling side, and even if they don't have the background of having come from a professional storytelling career, they're going to look at that and be attracted to it. They're going to recognize, because they're going to see the bolt-on side as well, right? Yeah. And I think they'll have the same conclusion. It was like, we might as well start with the story. So how would you, like, for someone who doesn't necessarily have a tremendous amount of experience, or they haven't read all of the screenwriting books and taken the screenwriting courses, or gone through the craft of storytelling in a professional way, how would you, if there was a Web3 project that came to you tomorrow and was like, we really want to do a story and build it into storytelling, but we have no idea what we're doing, what would you recommend that they do to kind of at least get their feet wet inside of a storytelling moment?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think, the major problem with a lot of screenwriting and a lot of Web3 projects actually is lack of villain, lack of conflict. So it's like, you have to establish not only who your heroes are, but also where the antagonists are, even if they're, both good, right? Everyone thinks they're correct. Everyone thinks they're right, but they have to be at odds. There has to be some sort of oppositional force if you want to tell stories. And then, I think I would say start with the story before you start drawing. Like, type it out. And what we did on Runner is we created something called a series Bible, which is what they do in television shows, where you sit down and you type out, this is my main character, this is what they want, this is their best friend, this is what they want, this is my leader of the free world, whoever it is, like, this is what they are like, this is this tyrant everyone hates, this is the foot soldiers of this tyrant, this is how these dynamics work. Let's talk about the setting, let's talk about the themes. This is about technology upsetting the ruling class. This is about stratification in society, and like whatever it is that you're talking about, write that out. And in our case, like, that was a 30-page document, 40-page document, right? This is like season 1, this is the first story, and then it branches into, this happens, this is season 2, this is season 3, right? And you start there. Runner, we started building in that way actually before I knew what NFTs were. We started this in 2020, and we didn't know if it was a TV show or a movie or something. This is how we work, is like this very kind of creative, finger painty space where you have to make the story for the story's sake. And obviously, as movie producers, we get to do this as part of our full-time job too. So it's like, we spend a lot of time exploring a lot of different ideas, and the ones that are really good are the ones that we end up kind of going, we abandon a lot of stuff because at a certain point, some of them are just better than others. But as we were really starting to dive into Runner, was the same time I started to dive into, it was probably like May 2021, right? Like watching Apes take off, and then watching everything that happened over that summer, and kind of thinking like, oh, how do we participate in Web3? What does this look like? What, somebody's going to come out with this like great storytelling project. And I sort of sat there and I was like, where's the storytelling project? Like, is it here yet? When's it going to happen? And then I started thinking about it. I was like, what, my boss actually asked me, he was like, so what's it look like if somebody does this in storytelling? I was like, well, it looks like Runner, right? It looks like you take Runner And because you have this world and you have this conceit with this whole competitive aspect, and you have all of these different characters.
Mm-hmm.
The amazing thing about this world we've created is that you can put any character in this world and there's an interesting story to tell, because the world is interesting and the world has conflict. Like, what nation you're from sets you at odds against another nation. Right? No matter who you are. And so you have this kind of larger conflict, and then you can drill down into specific characters. And so it has like these really kind of incredible legs to it, because there's a lot of depth there. But if I were telling somebody how to sit down and like think of what their story should be, in the first place, at the very, very baseline, it's just like good guy, bad guy, oppositional forces.
Okay, so if somebody was kind of new to everything, you say, okay, it's not just about creating. It's not just about creating the artwork or the design or the utility mechanics of what you're going to get with the thing. It's also saying, okay, if you're creating a world, who are these characters? What do they represent? And then what are they up against, or who is against, or what is against them?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. And the way we built this, so we built out our Bible, and then we went and we built out a visual Bible, where we talk about references, things that it looks like. You know, our visuals are very, we call it Euro anime. So there's obviously a lot of pulled from traditional anime, but then it's also like by way of what's happening in Europe right now. If you look at like Arcane, Runeterra, League of Legends, like those Riot properties that are so cool. And it's basically, it's a bunch of European animators, Western animators that grew up on anime, are finally in charge of their own studios. And so you're seeing this incredible kind of like absorption of anime, not just from Asia, but all the way around the world. It is absolutely far away the most popular art style in the world right now. The other thing that it has going for it in this moment that's really unique is traditional Western animation and like comic book art is really, really cool, but does not translate very well to animation. And does not translate very well to like digital gaming, things like that, because it's a little bit too detailed, a little bit too, the way it's shaded is dark and things. And what's so cool about anime is you can take it, you can actually create a digital version of these characters. They're very kind of graphic and geometric. And so you can build the 3D version of them, and they will look the same on the page as they do in 3D as they do on the screen. And I think, that was a very intentional choice that we made.
Yeah, we did something similar to that.
Yeah, because you're thinking.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to cut you off. Go for it.
No. I think I'm good, but I think like, that's something that, again, gets overlooked often when people are making NFT projects, which is like they've created a really great two-dimensional graphic image that works really well as a profile picture when you shrink it way, way down. That's right. But and it has to work that way. It has to. There's huge power in that, and that was the determining factor within NFTs for a very long time. So it makes sense that people are leaning into that. But when you think about, okay, but how does this translate on a broader scale? It's like, well, we got to get a little bit more detailed and a little bit more intentional and more specific, because within the world of NFTs, there's some awesome stuff. Like I love 3D glasses, and I love hoods, and I love gold skin and gold suits and everything. And we've incorporated some of that into our project just because, you got to nod out to the Web3 community. And at the same time, you got to think about it and say like, okay, but why? Why do the people why do the people in this collection have World War I Army helmets? Like, what is that? Like, what is that? What is that for? What is that about? Yeah. And if it doesn't fit in your world, you have to, be really discerning about what it is that you include.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. To your point, I think that's another thing that I think that's a really great point that people don't really look at is if you're going to build a universe and your goal is to have this project transcend just the NFT world and actually spread out into other media, like, when I was designing the characters for Adult Fantasy, it was same thing, incredibly intentional, 100% intention. The style of the characters, I wanted the characters were um, very, very much animatable, right?
Mhm.
With 1 degree more of detail, so that it was enough. It was enough. It was enough so that an animator could look at it and like remove a couple of lines and have a full character, right?
Yeah.
A 3/4 character done. And it was enough for a comic artist, if they wanted to add more to it, they would actually have a little more detail to say, okay, well, we can take this and go as dark,
Do a
as
cover.
gritty, as detailed as we want. So it
Yeah.
was very intentional. So it's interesting that you guys are doing the same, because I don't hear a lot of people talk about that, like, at all. So I think you guys are one of the few.
No, well, and it's one of those things. I think, we're a rare project in that obviously we have a director in Cedric Nicholas Troyan, he's a live action director, but he's a longtime VFX supervisor. And before he's a VFX supervisor, he was an animator. So he's our head of art, right? But he is not our artist, right? We worked with an animation studio out of Copenhagen, and we had a team of like 25 people that were working on this project. So you have to come up with a cohesive vision, and you have to come up with like a very specific vision before you go into that process, or you're just burning artist time. And I think a lot of NFT projects are either hiring the only artist they know, or they're hiring, the cheapest artist they can find,
right?
Who can complete something, and they're not so used to approaching something the way we approach things when we make a movie, which is like, okay, let's sit down and create a vision board and then adhere to it, because the aesthetic is so important. And I think, you're a rare person in that you have the skills to go do it yourself, which I wish I had, because would be really convenient.
Yeah, fair enough.
But it's, if you've never worked in this level of character design before, most people who like to draw, right, have probably never had to approach something from the creative direction that you have to do it when you're creating something cohesive. Mm-hmm. And then people who are not artists, who've never had to manage artists, who don't have to give very specific detailed directions to artists, and then, make sure that what multiple artists are creating simultaneously all works within the same sort of umbrella. That's hard to do. If you haven't had the experience in doing that, you are probably not going to succeed at it the first time out the gate. Mm-hmm. Or at least you are going to learn a lot the first time out the gate and make several mistakes. And I think it's just something that I would encourage everyone who's going to go create their own project to like really sit down and ideate exactly what it is that you're making. Not necessarily to like tell, there's a real power in giving your artists small directions and then letting them create something on their own, because if you hire good artists, they will always create something better than what you had in your own brain.
Oh, that's 100% true.
So you also have to be able to know when you need to let go, like, when to give reins, right? But that's a difficult skill, and it's all about hiring the right team, giving the right directions, having the right notes, knowing which battles are important, which ones are not, and then also giving everyone enough leash that they can, feel creatively fulfilled. So one of the things that we did while we were making Runner that was super fun is, obviously we had to go and create the mannequin that everything gets put on top of, which is very stressful and specific, because you need all of your clothing and faces and everything to align properly when you build it. But then once that's built, what we did is we took that mannequin and we sent it to our artists, and we were just like, hey guys, draw close, right? Like, you understand what our different nations are. You know what the story is. You know what these characters are. Just ideate, just like throw some things around and we'll see what happens. And then we went through and we started pulling, there were things that we were looking for. It was like, okay, I definitely need a coat, right? I need a long coat of some kind. So we're going to look for that. But then somebody throws in, there's this like ridiculous feather boa that we have, this like big fur kind of boa thing. That's part of our collection that I love. And that was just an artist who got bored one day. I was like, fuck this. This guy's not wearing clothes. This guy's wearing, right, like go-go boots and a feather boa. And it's just like a ridiculous drawing, but you look at it and you think to yourself, you're like, oh, well, we can actually take that and that can become a piece within the collection. And like, that's a really good example of just like, if you hire the right people and you set the right things up, you'll get things back that you did not expect that were, so much more than you expected.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Willie D has a great question. He says, I see Runner comic is sold out. Are there other ways to get the whitelist?
So the first edition Runner comic came with a first edition NFT, and that sold out. But there will be further, there will be a further comic drop that will include whitelist, allow list spot. And there are several, or a few thousand more that will be available. It is not posted yet, but it will be available soon. Follow us on Discord and Twitter. We will be announcing it for sure.
Now, is that the sold out one? Is that something you can get on secondary?
Not yet. So we sold it out. There's going to be a claim to actually get the NFT of it, just because there was a whole issue with the timing of it all. But the first edition NFT will be available on secondary soon, if you can find someone to sell them. We'll see.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that's awesome, man. So where can everybody hit you up at? Like, where, if we want to get everyone that watches this, listens to this later, across all the social media platforms, like how can they get involved with Runner? Where should they go? What should they do? How do they interact?
So our Twitter is OmegaXRunner. You can find us there. You'll also find all of the links to our socials. We have a web page, which is OmegaXRunner.xyz. There's a lot of really cool information there. You can click around the site. We've got a map of the world with different like concept art you can bounce around. We've got a few characters that we've shown, but most of them are still pretty under wraps. And then jump into the Discord. There's a lot going on in the Discord. We've already started talking about, different pieces of story and lore and things there. Some of it's stuff that we're leaking, and some of it is things where we're asking the community to contribute and really kind of invent for themselves. We've also started a thing where people have started declaring themselves for different nations. There are 4 main nations with different sort of ethoses, and it's been very fun and communal and a little bit divisive, which is always the best way to engage on the internet. So
I know that.
I encourage everyone to come in and join the Laurentian provinces. And if you're not going to join the Laurentian provinces, stay the fuck out. But come on in, come by. There will be another comic offering. The comic is physical. It gets shipped to your door. Nice. Which is just something we wanted to do, which is like, let's live within traditional media and, the internet at one time. I think that's something that's really important. And the second edition of the second issue of the comic is it's actually getting lettered right now, but the art is done. So very excited to share that, hopefully in the next few months. Awesome,
man. Well, everybody, do yourself a favor, go check out Runner. It's OmegaXRunner.xyz, right?
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I mean, the art, if you guys have not seen the website yet, the art is stellar. The comic artwork is fantastic. And you can tell just by listening to Bryce, he knows what the hell he's talking about. So, Bryce, man, thank you so much for coming out and showing up on Evening Alpha. This was great.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Everybody, go check it out. And with that, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for sharing and sending us your questions and engaging. And with that, we will see you guys on the next